The smell of roasted chicken and cedar smoke filled the Whitmore dining room, yet all I tasted was the silence that swallowed my name when my sister raised her glass. Crystal caught the chandelier's fire, scattering light across polished mahogany. Candles struggled against the November dark pressing on the windows, yet inside the room glowed with warmth and pride that had nothing to do with me. I sat halfway down the table, visible enough to count as family, distant enough to be forgotten. My father once said success spoke for itself. But in this house, silence had always been the easiest way to erase me. Tonight, I decided to let that silence linger because one day I would make it proof. Edward Whitmore cleared his throat, rising with practiced ease. To Victoria, who seized New York before New York even realized they needed her. Applause broke like clockwork. His hand rested on her shoulder as if she were the heir to a crown. She always knew how to lead. Margaret added, her pearl earrings glinting as she turned. Her eyes brushed past me like a breeze against glass. I gripped my silver goblet, the crest pressing cold against my palm. The table smelled of butter and rosemary, wealth baked into every dish. I drew breath to speak finally something of my own. I received my commission. Victoria's laugh sliced neatly through my words. Leadership is only real when it moves the market. Government paychecks don't count as innovation. The table rippled with polite laughter. Daniel Brooks, seated far away, didn't laugh. His eyes flicked toward me, steady, waiting. I let the words dissolve on my tongue. It was not weakness, but strategy. Conversation swelled again. Square footage, clients' shoes. I learned more about Victoria's closets than my parents had ever asked about my orders. Margaret eventually glanced my way. Evelyn's, in Virginia. Some course Quantico, I answered. Officer training, a networking dream. Victoria purred and the laughter returned. I pressed the goblet tighter, memorizing faces, angles, loyalties. Every smile told me who belonged where. The chandelier chimed as the heat shifted. The air bent for just a moment, and I wondered if anyone else felt the weight of that silence. Dessert appeared, pecan pie sliced with precision. My father tapped his glass again. To our star. To hustle and returns. More applause. My name still absent. Victoria rose, soaking in the stage she had always claimed. Her eyes slid to mine, carrying the thrill of an old rivalry. She lifted her glass high. To real success, the kind that pays off. The room clapped, forks banged, cousins cheered. I did not move. I kept my eyes on her, unblinking. The goblet bit into my skin like a vow. Daniel's gaze found mine again. He gave the faintest nod as if to say he saw. I stood with the others when chairs scraped and conversations shifted, but inside me something had settled, a weight, or perhaps a weapon. I touched the back of my chair once before leaving, marking it as a place where I had sat silent, watching. I raised my glass without a word. One day I promised myself it would not be her voice the room remembered. The first time I crawled through North Carolina mud under live rounds, I realized my family's words weren't the only weight pressing me down. The ground was cold and unforgiving, water seeping through my sleeves, grit in my teeth. Each burst of gunfire cracked overhead like the world reminding me how small I was. My body moved forward, but my mind was still chained to that dining table in Pennsylvania, where silence had been wielded like a blade. Here, silence was different, deadly if I broke it, but also something I could own. Boots pounded the earth around me, the squad struggling through barbed wire and uneven dirt. Sergeant Paul Atkins's voice carried above the chaos. Careful, Whitmore. Don't get that uniform dirty. Daddy might not pay for a replacement. Laughter flared sharp and mean. I clenched my jaw, kept crawling, mud pressing into my hairline. By the time we scrambled to cover, the squad was scattered. Half had veered off course, taking the wrong trench. Master Sergeant Marcus Green's whistle split the air. His expression was stone. What the hell was that? You call this leadership? His eyes pinned me. You're in charge, Lieutenant. Squad's failure is your failure. The words landed heavier than the gear strapped to my back. I started to answer, but he'd already turned away. Orders barked. Reset the drill. No excuses. Hours blurred into bruises. My uniform clung to me, soaked, stinking of mud and gun oil. At dusk, I sat against a post, peeling off one boot to shake out gravel. Voices drifted from the fire line. "She won't last 6 months," one private muttered. "Bet she'll wash out before summer." "I'll take that bet," another laughed. I didn't move. Their doubt tasted familiar, like Thanksgiving, like Victoria's smirk. The difference was that here I had the chance to prove them wrong. Marcus approached, his shadow cutting across me. "On your feet, Whitmore." I scrambled up. "You think today was hard. You're going to run it again. Tonight." His voice was flat, merciless. "If you want respect, earn it in the dark." The squad groaned, but I didn't hesitate. My lungs burned as we lined up, the course stretched before us, shadows long and jagged under floodlights. The first crawl sliced my palms. Roots clawed at my knees, mud sucking me down. I kept moving. Atkins's voice trailed behind me this time, but the mocking edge was gone. They were too tired to waste breath. Halfway through, silence fell, no jeers, no bets, only the rhythm of bodies hitting the ground and the snap of commands. I pushed harder, each drag forward, carving away doubt. When the finish line came into view, my arms trembled, but I refused to slow. I crossed first, chest-heaving mud streaked across my face like war paint. Marcus stood there, arms crossed. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Again he said, "And so we did." Twice more, until dawn threatened the horizon. The final crawl ended in exhaustion, so complete I could hardly stand. My squad collapsed beside me in the wet grass, breath ragged. For once, no one spoke. Marcus walked the line, boots sinking into mud. He stopped near me, crouched low enough that only I heard him. "We've got your 6, Whitmore." His voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than any applause I had ever been denied. I stared at him, chest tight. It was the first silence that didn't erase me. It honored me. Around me, the others began to rise, slower but steadier, and none of them looked at me with doubt now. As the sun rose over Lejeune, I realized I wasn't just enduring, I was being forged. And forged steel cuts deeper when the time comes. The first time I saw Victoria's name tied to a defense contract, it wasn't in a family announcement. It was buried in a file I wasn't supposed to touch. I had been in the Pentagon long enough to know which doors stayed closed and which drawers stayed locked. Silence had once been my cage, but now it was my cover. A favor here, an overlooked clearance there, and suddenly I was staring at a procurement file that smelled of smoke even before I read the numbers. My sister's consulting firm appeared as an advisory intermediary, a phrase designed to mean nothing and hide everything. Yet the contract value was 3 times the going rate, padded with layers of corporate fog. I closed the folder, my pulse hammering against my throat. The vow I had made that Thanksgiving night still lived inside me, sharpened by every mile of mud at Lejeune. I had become steel. And steel, when silent, waits for its strike. That night, I copied fragments onto an encrypted drive. My hand shook only once when the copier light flickered across the office wall. Every second felt like a spotlight, though the corridor outside was empty. I slid the drive into my pocket, locking the original file back in its cabinet, my face arranged in calm detachment. The next day, I met Daniel at a quiet cafe in Dupont Circle. The city buzzed outside, but in here the air was heavy with roasted beans and whispered conversations. I slid a folded note across the table. No file too dangerous, just enough for him to see the outlines. He read quickly, his brow furrowing. "Evelyn, this isn't just business. It's blood money. If those numbers are real, people downrange are paying the price." His words dug deeper than any insult Victoria had ever flung. He wasn't just talking about corruption, he was talking about soldiers' shortchanged equipment failing in heat, and dust lives measured against padded invoices. "I can't ignore it," I said. He reached for my hand, then pulled back, glancing around the cafe. Then don't ignore this either. They'll bury you before they bury her. Are you ready for that? I didn't answer. Silence had power now. Later in the base gym, I caught Marcus Green between drills. The man had aged into his stripes, hair flecked with gray eyes sharper than ever. I spoke carefully, leaving gaps as though testing tripwires. Suppose someone found irregularities, high-level contracts, names tied too close to home. He wiped sweat from his forehead, staring at me like he could see the entire file reflected in my pupils. Careful, Whitmore. If you're going to play in that fire, wear gloves. His tone softened a fraction. But if you go through with it, you won't stand alone. That promise sat heavier on me than any rifle. The next evening, my phone lit up with Victoria's name. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but her voice poured through like champagne effervescent cutting. Little sister, she said, dragging the syllables, still chasing government paychecks. You'll never understand how real influence works. It's not earned, it's bought, and it's mine. I let her talk, every word weaving its own noose. I gave nothing back but silence, knowing she mistook it for surrender. Days later, the ledger surfaced, a hidden document buried in a folder marked innocuous, disguised as routine audits. Payments routed through shells in offshore havens, transactions looping in circles until the trail blurred. But not enough to vanish. I traced one transfer to a company only 3 months old, another to a name I recognized from a Christmas card list. Victoria's fingerprints glistened across every page. It was enough to shake her, not enough to end her. I closed my office door, the encrypted drive glowing faintly under lamplight. My reflection stared back from the black plastic surface, eyes calm, deliberate. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was something sharper. As I shut down the encrypted drive, I knew this wasn't just evidence. It was bait. And my sister was the kind of predator who couldn't resist. The room wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been mahogany tables, sharp suits, and the kind of silence that waits for a verdict. The chamber smelled of polished wood and cologne, heavy with performance. Cameras blinked red, recording every breath, while aides scribbled notes they would later claim were decisive. I'd stood in courtrooms before, but this was different. This was theater. All theater? And my sister had always loved an audience. Victoria began as expected. Her tailored suit caught the light as if stitched from ambition. She smiled with practiced warmth, hands folded to appear, humble voice tuned to that measured cadence consultants pay trainers to teach. Our firm, she told the committee, has saved taxpayers millions through efficiency and innovation. We provide solutions where bureaucracy fails. Applause wasn't permitted, but the nods were applause enough. Some members leaned back, satisfied, before any real question. Victoria thrived on staged praise, every gesture implying inevitability. When they called my name, I rose, smoothing the crease of my uniform. The microphones caught only my steady breath. They expected compliance, a rubber stamp, a sister's quiet nod to gild the golden child's story. But silence was no longer my wound. It was my weapon. I began simply describing procurement oversight and the cost of getting it wrong. My voice did not rise, did not shake. I laid out patterns, threading numbers like beads on a string. Then I set the string on the table and watched who looked away first. Victoria cut in with a laugh sharp enough to slice. Numbers can be twisted any way you like, Lieutenant. We innovate. Government delays, we fix. The chair frowned, half irked by her interruption, half swayed by her confidence. I let the quiet lengthen, then set the encrypted drive down, the plastic click, carrying farther than any speech. The drive held the ledger cross-referenced with Pentagon audits traced through offshore shells, detailed down to the signature beneath falsified invoices. Victoria's jaw tightened, though her lips kept their smile. She leaned forward, voice dipped in condescension. My sister misunderstands context. Without consultants like us, soldiers would be left with broken supply chains. Ask her comrades. At that cue, Marcus Green's boot struck the marble as he stood. His testimony was blunt. I've worn the gear she profited from. I've seen its failures. I've seen men pay for those failures. The room absorbed every word like sand drinks blood. The chamber shifted. Some members straightened, sensing opportunity. Others stiffened, sensing danger. Daniel in the gallery leaned forward, eyes steady, a quiet line in a storm. I continued drawing one sheet from the folder and holding it up. This is not interpretation. It is fact. Invoices for equipment never delivered. Paid in full. Signed here. My finger tapped the line. Victoria's name curved in ink, elegant and unmistakable. The room froze. Even paper stopped whispering. Margaret Whitmore sat rigid in the gallery, hands folded. For once, her smile failed to find her face. The applause she'd given Victoria at every table could not surface here. Victoria opened her mouth, but nothing arrived. The cameras caught the instant when certainty curdled, a fracture running through porcelain and on. Victoria's smile didn't break, it shattered. And in that silence I knew the verdict had already been written. When the hammer fell, it wasn't on wood, but on my sister's world contract, severed allies evaporating, and a silence louder than any gavel. The morning papers carried her face, once polished, into every glossy magazine, now framed with words like fraud and indictment. Cameras followed her through courthouse steps as former friends ducked their heads. The woman who once toasted herself as the embodiment of innovation now wore sunglasses against a storm of flashes. I did not watch long. The noise of collapse was deafening enough without the volume turned up. At the base, the air smelled of rain and engine oil. They called me to formation, voices clipped and formal. A medal was pressed into my palm, the ribbon cool against my skin. There were no reporters here, no staged applause, no champagne. Just the steady salute of Marines who had marched through mud beside me, men and women who measured worth in endurance, not headlines. The ceremony lasted only minutes, but its weight was immeasurable. In the silence after the command to dismiss, I felt something settle in me, the quiet recognition I had once begged for. That evening, the estate in Virginia was dressed in twilight. The garden smelled of damp earth, roses tired from the winter chill. My parents sat across from me, their postures brittle, their words withheld. Edward lifted his glass once as though by habit, then set it down before a toast could form. Margaret's gaze slipped to the gravel path, unable to anchor itself to me or to the truth. Silence hung between us, heavy but not suffocating. Victoria arrived without invitation. The scrape of her heels on stone carried fury more than grace. She demanded loyalty, demanded explanation, demanded that family was supposed to protect. Her voice filled the garden the way smoke fills a room, thick, choking, desperate. I did not rise. I simply placed the medal on the table. Its polished face caught the last of the light, gleaming steady while her words stumbled. She stared at it as if it were a weapon drawn. Edward's lips parted, but no defense for her came. Margaret looked away. Their silence was not erasure this time. It was judgment. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, warm and steady. No words passed between us because none were needed. Beyond the hedge, 2 Marines entered in uniform, Marcus at their side. Their salute was crisp, sharp against the dusk, a gesture both intimate and unshakably public. The garden itself seemed to still waiting for the echo. Victoria tried one last strike, her voice edged and brittle. You'll always just be the uniform, never the name. But no one answered her. Not our parents, not Daniel, not the Marines who still held their salute. Silence gathered instead, vast and undeniable, pressing down until her shoulders sagged under it. She turned away, first steps, quickened heels cracking against stone like a retreat. I remained. My fingers brushed the metal once more, cool and certain. The garden smelled of roses again, softer now, and the air no longer felt like judgment but like release. I once begged for recognition. Now I understood silence was recognition, and it was mine to command. My story didn't end with applause. It ended with quiet, and quiet was enough. I stood in silence when words would have been wasted, and that silence became my strength. If you see yourself in me, don't chase applause, seek dignity. Support those who fight quietly because integrity often speaks louder than cheers. Remember, respect earned in silence never fades.